Right, so before we dive into the chaos and controversy that surrounds the Pirate Bay, let's take a step back to where it all began. The Pirate Bay, or TPB as it's often called, was born in 2003 in Sweden, the brainchild of a group called Pirate Byron, or the Piracy Bureau.
A bit ironic, isn't it? A group literally named the Piracy Bureau, just announcing their intentions like that.
Exactly. But they weren't your typical swashbuckling pirates. Their mission was much bigger, challenging copyright laws and promoting freedom of information. It was a bit like digital activism, rebelling against the idea that information should be locked behind paywalls.
And they did it in a pretty bold way. The Pirate Bay became this massive online index for sharing everything. Films, music, software. If you could think of it, someone was probably sharing it there.
Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with how all this worked, which, honestly, most of us weren't when we first stumbled into it, the Pirate Bay didn't actually host the files themselves. It used torrents, which you'd download to retrieve the files from other users. Kind of like everyone pitching in to share a digital pie, piece by piece.
Then there were magnet links, yeah?
That's right. Introduced in 2012, actually. Magnet links made it even simpler and, more importantly, harder to legally pin down. Instead of downloading a small file to start sharing, you click a link and bam, your torrent client would take it from there. It was a pretty clever way to sidestep some of the legal pressure they were under.
Clever, but not exactly bulletproof. More on that later.
Oh, absolutely. But let's hold off on that for a moment because I want to touch on how this shaped digital culture back then. Now, I remember being a student in those early days and just, feeling like everything digital was up for grabs. Films, music, games. It was all just there. A few clicks and you had it.
Ah, the good old Wild West of the internet.
Exactly. And back then it didn't feel like stealing. People thought, or maybe wanted to believe, it was just sharing. Like lending a DVD to a mate, but on a much bigger scale. No one really stopped to think about the legal or ethical grey areas.
Or more like we conveniently ignored them, right?
True. And that mindset really fueled the Pirate Bay's rapid rise, making it a gateway for this massive global shift in digital consumption.
Right. So, with the Pirate Bay ushering in this new era of digital sharing, it was only a matter of time before it faced some serious pushback. And when the legal storm hit, it wasn't just big. It was headline-grabbing, worldwide attention kind of big.
That was the 2009 trial, wasn't it? It was pretty much inevitable, wasn't it? The whole operation practically had a giant neon target painted on it.
Exactly. The founders, Fredrik Nye, Peter Zunder and Gottfried Svartholm, along with Carl Lundström, who had a minor investment in TPB, found themselves in court. And the charge? Assisting in copyright infringement.
Which is, let's be honest, a pretty understated way of describing what most industries viewed as outright piracy on a global scale.
Too right. Now, this wasn't just some local case. Media outlets across the globe were tuned in, airing coverage like it was some kind of Hollywood blockbuster. And for good reason. The court's ruling was harsh. Each founder got a year in prison, and they were collectively fined 30 million Swedish krona. That's roughly $3.5 million back then.
Ouch, but did they actually serve the full sentence?
Not quite. After some appeals, the sentences were slightly reduced, though the fine, it was increased. 46 million krona. But fair to say, this trial was symbolic more than practical, wasn't it? I mean, shutting down the founders didn't exactly stop TPB.
It didn't even slow it down.
Exactly. Almost as soon as one version was down, another would spring right back up. It was like playing whack-a-mole, only with servers and proxies.
You had proxy sites everywhere, people backing up the entire library, mirror sites popping up. It was, like this community-led effort to keep it alive. Just sheer determination.
And, let's not forget, TPB itself adapted. It shifted its operations multiple times. Different domains, different hosting setups. And then, in 2014, came another monumental raid, this time by Swedish police. They seized servers and equipment, forcing TPB offline for a bit.
Emphasis on a bit. It didn't last.
Exactly. People joked that shutting TPB down was like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. Every raid, every block order, every fine, it didn't kill TPB, it sort of galvanised it. It became this symbol, a symbol of resilience in the face of relentless legal pressure.
Yeah, but at what cost? I mean, does this kind of defiance push the limits of innovation? Or does it just fuel further conflict between, creative industries and what's essentially digital rebellion?
A valid question. And this is where the debate gets tricky, doesn't it? Because on one hand, TPB showed us all how tech can adapt and, outsmart enforcement. But on the other hand, it's hard to ignore the ripple effects it's had on things like copyright protection, fair revenue for creators.
And the digital economy as a whole, yeah, it's not black and white, is it?
No, it's definitely murky waters. But speaking of innovation and sidestepping, we should probably talk about how TPB found ways to fund itself beyond ads and donations.
And speaking of adaptability, here's something fascinating. The Pirate Bay didn't just rely on ads and donations to keep running. Nope, it ventured into the then emerging world of cryptocurrency. Bold move, right?
Absolutely. They were ahead of the curve, you could say. Back in 2013, they started accepting Bitcoin and eventually even Litecoin for donations. And then there was that experiment in 2017.
Oh yes, the mining script. They embedded a cryptocurrency miner into the site, which quietly used visitors' computer resources to mine Monero. It was controversial to say the least, especially since they didn't tell anyone at first. I mean, you visit a site to download a file and, surprise, your processor's heating up, mining crypto.
Not exactly subtle, was it? But to their credit, they acknowledged it was a test to see if they could replace ad revenue. Still, it didn't quite take off as they might have hoped.
And let's not forget their ambitious foray into creating their own digital token in 2021, the Pirate Token. Although, to be fair, that fizzled out almost as quickly as it appeared.
Yeah, but it does make you wonder, doesn't it? They were clearly trying to innovate their way around financial challenges. And on some level, you have to admire their resourcefulness, even if it sometimes pushed the ethical boundaries, like the mining without consent.
Exactly. It's a pattern with the Pirate Bay. Always adapting, always staying one step ahead. And speaking of adapting, we can't ignore the impact they've had on how people consume content globally. I mean, they effectively turned piracy into a normalised part of digital culture.
Right. They were a game changer. Entire industries had to rethink their strategies. Hollywood, music labels, video game publishers, they all started grappling with this new reality where people wanted instant free access to everything. And the Pirate Bay wasn't just a platform, it became a cultural touchpoint for debates about copyright and information freedom.
But let's not forget the other side of the coin. For all the freedom it promoted, there were real economic consequences. Take, for example, one of the biggest Hollywood film studios. They reported losing millions to piracy, claiming it undermined creative investments and job stability.
Yeah, but then you've got stories like this one teacher in, say, a country with heavy censorship who could only access educational materials thanks to torrenting. It's such a complex issue, isn't it? On one hand, loss and theft. On the other, access and empowerment.
And it's that tension that makes TPB so fascinating. It wasn't just about piracy, it was about challenging the status quo and reshaping the conversation around ownership and access in the digital age. Love it or hate it, you can't deny its impact.
True. And as we move forward, debates about copyright reform, fair usage, and digital accessibility are only going to get more heated. The Pirate Bay might not be the juggernaut it once was, but its legacy, that'll stick around.
Definitely. And with that, we'll wrap it up. The Pirate Bay may have started as a tiny experiment in Sweden, but it grew to symbolise something much bigger, a clash of values, a test of resilience, and a revolution in how we share and consume information. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. It's been a fascinating journey. See you next time.